Hi, Dickens Reads families. It is Wednesday, time for book club. This week we are reading Una Judge Outwits the Washingtons, an enslaved woman's fight for freedom. Now, I have really enjoyed this book. It is by Gwendolyn Hooks and illustrated by Simone Agoussoye. I hope I pronounced that right. I think you're gonna enjoy this story. Una Judge outwits the Washingtons, an enslaved woman's fight for freedom. This may end up having to be a two-part story because it is a very big story. It is rather long. So we'll read so much and see how it goes. Young Una Maria Judge was too little for housework. She had not grown strong enough for fieldwork. Instead, she weeded, fed the chickens, and fetched water from the well. Fetching water was not a safe job for a small child. Una would slowly lower the bucket deep down into the well. She was careful not to lean over too far. If she fell in, there would be no one to help her. The old folks who watched over the young were too feeble for rescue. Here we see young Una Judge. Una lived with her family on a Virginia plantation called Mount Vernon. They were all enslaved. Being enslaved meant they were considered legal property, like a mule or a cornfield. Una and her family lived and worked in harsh conditions for no pay. Almost 700,000 other enslaved black people in the United States did too. The enslaved people at Mount Vernon were property of George and Martha Washington. General Washington was one of the most famous men in the United States. He was a commander of the Continental Army during the American Revolution. American colonists fought the Revolutionary War against the British. The colonists won the right to make laws for themselves. At last, independence. But nothing changed for Una and most other enslaved people throughout the newly independent country. They would work for the rest of their lives for the slaveholders. If they displeased their owners, they were often sold to other slaveholders. Sometimes slaveholders sold children. Mothers and fathers stood helpless and brokenhearted as their children disappeared down the road. They would never see one another again. Una knew life was a little easier inside the house than out in the fields. She hoped to work alongside her mother, Betty. Betty sewed for the Washington family. She also sewed and mended clothes for the enslaved people on the plantation. Una's little fingers were strong like her mother's, and she learned fast. Una was about 10 years old the day Mrs. Washington sent for her. From then on, Una would work inside the house with her mother. She learned to spin thread and weave cloth. She sewed quick and steady stitches. She added elegant touches to Mrs. Washington's dresses. Even General Washington praised her skills. Most importantly, Una could be near her mother while they worked. One day a letter arrived. General Washington had been elected President of the United States. The letter from Congress declared that Washington had the support of the citizens of the United States, a free and enlightened people. Una was taught nothing of freedom or enlightenment. She knew little about life beyond the plantation. Being curious or bright didn't matter. Una was allowed to learn only about the work she was forced to do. Even if she tried, hungry, was tired, hungry or thirsty, Una had to work and obey the Washingtons. Mrs. Washington organized the move from Mount Vernon to the capital, New York City. Who should she take along? She knew they needed enslaved workers in their new home. The Washingtons picked those who they felt were honest, smart, and not likely to run away. Una was chosen to go along. Her brother Austin and 5 other enslaved people were also chosen. In 1789, the Washingtons left Mount Union for their new home. New York City dazzled Una. The streets bustled with foot traffic and carriages. Una lived in the presidential mansion with the Washingtons. The president and Mrs. Washington paid white servants to work for them, but the enslaved workers received no pay. Una was Martha's personal slave. She accompanied her everywhere. Una rode a horse behind the carriage that carried Martha when she visited friends. She went with Martha on sightseeing trips around the city. Una helped Martha bathe. Una brushed Martha's hair. She repaired and pressed Martha's dresses. She kept Martha's fancy shoes with golden threads spotless. At bedtime, she fetched Martha's Bible for her nightly reading. Una had little time to herself. On Thursdays and Fridays, the Washingtons entertained their friends. These occasions were the only chance Una had to relax and talk to Austin, the other enslaved people, and the white servants. Her conversations with them helped ease the pain she felt being away from the rest of her family. She couldn't wait to see them again. President Washington soon grew tired of city life. He wanted to visit Mount Vernon. Una was thrilled. They packed up the household and headed to Virginia. Una wanted to tell everyone about her life in the president's house. She worked with white servants, and she slept in the same house with them and the Washingtons. Una worked hard in New York City. Her duties were tiresome. Still, she knew she was experiencing things that enslaved people at Mount Vernon never would. Soon after they arrived home, Una learned they would not return to New York City after all. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania was the largest city in the United States and more centrally located than New York City. Philadelphia had been chosen to be the new capital and residence of the president. Una's new home would be near Independence Hall, where men had signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. These important papers granted rights and freedoms to citizens of the United States. But these documents did nothing for Una. Because she was enslaved and treated as though she were property, she was not a citizen. For Una, freedom was as far away as the moon. In Philadelphia, Una's days and nights continued as they had in New York City. But the city itself was very different. People in Philadelphia had begun to argue against slavery. Free black people walked around Philadelphia. They went to churches. Una was curious about their lives, but she was careful when she asked them questions. Others might think she was plotting to escape. She didn't want the president to hear that she had been asking about her freedom. And I think that that might be a good place to start. We will pick back up on Una Judge Outwits the Washingtons, an enslaved woman's fight for freedom on next Wednesday and see what happens to Una Judge. Thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to reading with you again. Happy reading!